Fragment of On Music by Theophrastus, as found in the commentary on Ptolemy's Harmonics by Porphyry, translated by Andrew Barker. Perhaps there are a good many others who agree with me, though I cannot list them by name, since I am not in possession of their writings. But Theophrastus will be adequate to stand for me in the place of all of them, since he demonstrated the absurdity of the doctrine by several arguments, powerful ones, as I at least am convinced, in the second book of his On Music. We should write down what he said, and reckon his remarks to be capable of correcting those who take the side of Ptolemy. They are as follows. Quote, "For the movement productive of melody, when it occurs in the soul, is very accurate when it, the soul, wishes to express it, the movement, with the voice. It, the soul, turns it, the voice, and turns it just as it wishes, to the extent that it is able to turn that which is non-rational. Some people decided to refer it, the soul's accuracy, to numbers, saying that the accuracy of the interval arises in accordance with ratios between numbers. For they said that the ratio of the octave is the same as that of the duple, the ratio of the fifth the same as that of the hemiolic, the ratio of the fourth the same as that of the epitritic, and that for all the other intervals in the same way, just as for the other numbers, there is a ratio peculiar to each. Hence, they said that music consists in quantity, since its distinctions exist on the basis of quantity. In saying this, they seem to some people to be more intelligent than the harmonicoi, who judge by perception, since they judge by the ratios of intelligible numbers. They fail to realize that if the difference is a quantity, this same difference arises in accordance with the difference in quantity, and must be a melody or part of a melody. Thus, if one color differs from one another in quantity, as it must be a melody or part of a melody, if indeed melody and interval are a number, and if melody and the difference it contains exist because of a number. For if every interval were a quantity, and if melody arose from the differences between the notes, the melody would be as it is because it is a number. But if it were nothing but a number, everything numerable would participate in melody too, to the extent that it does in number. If, however, quantity belongs to notes in the same way as it does to color being something different from the quantity itself, then a note is one thing and the quantity related to it another. But if a note is something other than a number, then the lower and the higher note differ from one another either as notes or in respect of their quantity. If they differ in quantity, and if the higher is as is by being moved in accordance with more numbers, the lower by being moved in respect of fewer, what else could be the characteristic proper to sound? For every sound is such as to be grasped either as high or low, for every sound is higher than this one, and lower than that, so that the quantity of the one is smaller and that of the other greater, and hence it is a number. When this is taken away, what would be left to make it a sound? But if the sound is higher or lower than some other, the sound possesses quantity, while if it possesses something else, it will no longer be sound. But if it is as notes that high and low ones differ from one another, we shall no longer have any need of quantity, for their own intrinsic difference will be sufficient by itself for the generation of melodies, and knowledge of the differences will be possible. For the differences will no longer exist in accordance with the quantities, but in accordance with the quality peculiar to the sounds, as is the case with colors. For no color taken simply as such differs in quantity from another color taken simply as such. The quantities can be equal, just as if one mixed with white an equal amount of black, the numbers of the white would not be said to be more than those of the black, nor those of the black than those of the white. Nor would they if bitter were mixed with sweet, for each of them is equal in the area over which they are spread. But the quantity is equally spread out in accordance with its own special quality. Thus, the high sound does not consist of more numerous parts, or move in accordance with more numbers, and neither does the low one, for it is as possible to speak in this way of the latter as of the former, since there is a characteristic magnitude that belongs to a low sound. This is clear from the force exerted when people sing, for just as they need a certain power in order to give out a high sound, so do they also in order to give a low one. In the one case, they draw in the ribs and stretch out the windpipe, narrowing them by force. In the other, they widen the windpipe, which is why they make the throat shorter, since the width contracts the length. In the case of alloy, too, there is a similar fact that power is needed to blow forcibly into a narrower one or into a wider one, so as to fill it. In alloy, in fact, the case is even clearer, for a high note requires less labor, since it arises through the holes that are higher up, while a low note demands greater force, if the breath is impelled through the whole pipe, so that however much length is added, there is added the same amount of strength in the breath. In strings, it is clear that there is equality in each of the two cases, for by whatever amount the tension of the thinner is tighter, but the same amount the one that seems slacker is thicker. Hence, by however much the sound from the thinner is stronger, by the same amount the other is heavier. For it is from the larger that there comes the greater encircling sound. For how could some notes be concordant if there were no equality? For what is in excess is unblended, since what is beyond the measure becomes evident over and above the mixture. Hence, with the stronger things in the blend, there is a greater sound of what is slacker, to produce equality of power. Thus, if there is a concord, there is also equality of the things from which it arises. For if the high note moved in accordance with more numbers, how could consonance come about? Further, if, as they say, the higher note is also heard at a greater distance, through its traveling further because of the sharpness of its movement, or through its arising as the result of plurality, then this note can never be concordant with the low one, neither when it is heard alone, if indeed the concord consists in both of them, nor when it has ceased. For because of this unnoticed cessation, it must no longer be heard, nor, most importantly, when both of them are heard. For then the higher is more vigorous, since it is capable of traveling further. Hence it obscures and overpowers the low note, so that it appropriates the perception for itself, even while the lower note is not reduced in power. But since concordance exists, displaying equality between the two notes, there is an equality of their powers, differing in the quality belonging to each. For what is higher is naturally more conspicuous, not stronger, and that is why it is apprehended at a greater distance than the lower, just as is white in relation to any other color, or as is anything else that is more strongly apprehended, not because one of the two is less what it naturally is, or because it does not move in accordance with equal numbers, but because perception focuses more on the one than the other, because of its unlikeness to its surrounding. Thus the low note penetrates, as far as the ear, too, but the hearing grasps the higher note more quickly because of its special quality, not because of the plurality it contains. And if indeed the higher note does move to a greater distance, it is not because it is moved in accordance with more numbers, but because of its shape, since the high sound travels more forwards and upwards, while the low note travels more equally all about. This is clear also from instruments, for those with a horn and those equipped with a bronze vessel are more resonant round about, since the sound made is equal all around. Again, if one were to utter a high note while touching one's ribs, and then a low note, one would feel the movement about one's rib more, while the hand in the case of the low note. And if one were to touch the tortoise shell, or the horn or arm of an instrument, then when one struck the thin string, and that which generates a low sound, once again one would feel the movement in the hollow body more when one struck the string that generates the lower sound. For the low note travels everywhere all around, while the high note travels forward, or in the direction in which the utterer compels it to go. Then, if the low note moved all around to the same degree that the high note moves forwards, it would not move in accordance with fewer numbers, as is plain too from the facts about alloy. For the larger aulos is lower pitched, the one, that is, in which there is more breadth, through all of which the movement goes. But neither can the high note be distinguished by its speed, for then it would occupy the hearing first, so that a concord would not arise. If it does arise, both are of equal speed. Hence, it is not some unequal numbers that give the explanation of the differences, but the sounds with their natural qualities, being naturally attuned together. Again, it is not the intervals, as some people say, that are the causes of the differences, and hence their principles, since if these are left out, the differences still remain. For when something comes into being, if certain things are left out, these are not the causes of its existence, not as productive causes, but only as things that do not prevent it. For the unmelodic is not a cause of the melodic, since the melodic would not come into being if the unmelodic were not rejected. Not would any other thing be characterized by knowledge if the opposite, the knower's ignorance, were not rejected. For ignorance is not the cause of one's knowing through its existence, but through not preventing it, when it is rejected, so that neither are the intervals the causes of melody as producing it, but as not preventing it. For if someone were to sing simultaneously the continuous series of intervening positions as well, the sound produced would certainly be unmelodic. Then, while the unmelodic would arise if these were not rejected, it is not through their being left out that the melody arises, merely because they would prevent it if they were not left out. It is therefore a great help that melody revolves around these, enabling us to find that notes that are attuned to one another. But it is these notes that are the causes of the melody, while if the rejected intervals are made apparent, they are the causes of the unmelodic, whose principles they might be said to be, not those of melodic sound. Thus, neither are the intervals causes of the melodic, but damage it, at least when they are made apparent, nor are the numbers causes, by the notes differing from one another in quantity. For the low notes are found to be equal to the high ones, in a different respect, in accordance with the way in which the labor involved is also equal in opposite respects. For people uttering low notes labor no less than those uttering high ones, but exert their effort in the opposite direction. The nature of music is one. It is a movement of the soul that occurs in correspondence with its release from the evils due to the emotions, and if it were not this, neither would it be the nature of music. End of the fragment of On Music by Theophrastus, translated by Andrew Barker, published in the Cambridge University Press, 1989.